All right, History 111, folks. Let's talk about a couple of different things. Number one, I'll address the elephant in the room. Yeah, I look a little bit banged up, but thanks for a couple of visits to the dermatologist and a couple of spots to be biopsies and whatnot. I'll be fine. It just won't be as pretty looking as normal. So, although some folks do tell me I'm not pretty in the first place, I'm okay with that. What I want to do is this. We're going to be taping each of the sessions in the course, and so fully the expectation is for each lecture to be recorded, and you're supposed to watch that lecture before you get back to class, and that's wonderful if you do that. But the problem is those lectures are going to be anywhere from 50 minutes at a minimum. For some of the courses, they're going to be an hour and 10 minutes. That just seems a little bit long to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do what I've done for the other courses, thanks to spring and summer, and post some short videos that run anywhere from 8 to 10 minutes apiece. And so the first one is going to be the introduction to the 111 course, and World Civilizations to me is one of my favorite courses. But here's the thing, we talk about an awful lot of stuff along the way, and for some people it bumps into their belief systems. One of the things I have to tell you is we're going to talk about evolution, we're going to talk about creationism, we're going to talk in this course, we'll hit the Christian Bible at one particular point, and I'm well aware of what the creation story is, and I also am well aware of when we start talking about Charles Darwin, we start talking about the evolution of man, we talk about the descent of man and origin of the species. I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. If you're Catholic, then gosh, you've probably already heard from the Pope that he doesn't think the two ideas are mutually exclusive either. I'm okay with that. Here is the thing that I want to talk about, is if you think about it. Look at your parents, look at your grandparents. If you are lucky enough to have a photo album or access to some kind of genetic link, look at your great-grandparents, and on and on and on and on and on. You'll see similar traits, but also you'll see differences. I told most of the classes that when it comes to my grandma on my mother's side, she is 6'4". She was built with the shoulders of a linebacker. My grandfather on my father's side had the same kind of shoulders, but their spouses were the little bitty people. Right, little bitty, but very nice people. But again, so I am a genetic mix of them along the way. And I've also told the students, listen, I'm not 6'4". I'm 5'11" on a good day, and that's with heels. No, not high heels, because I don't wear them anymore. But I'm 5'10" most of the time. Most of my boys are 6'4". My wife is strapping, not 6'4" at this particular point. And so they pull from the genetic material of both her side of the family and my side of the family. And the thing is when it comes to DNA, when it comes to genetics, we're kind of a mixed bag of that, but it's about that evolution. And that's what I want to talk about. The course talks in the very beginning about the evolution of mankind. It talks about the beginning of man, and it relates back archaeological research. The text talks about Mungo Man. It talks about ochre. What's significant is when we start to talk about mankind, we start to talk about civilizations, I want you to think about the civilization starter kit. Okay, civilization starter kit is going to be about that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What do you need to survive? Well, you've got to have air. Okay, you can't survive without air. You've got to have water, because you can only survive a certain number of while without water. And then you got to have food. Food is really third on the list. And then people are always throwing, got to have clothing. It's like, no, you don't have to have clothing. Our design is such that if we live in a temperate zone, we don't have to have clothing. Now, is it more sanitary? Yes. Are there parts that need to be covered? Well, according to our cultural and religious beliefs, yes. Do they really have to be? Well, the fact is that when it comes to animals, our design as far as fur, our design as far as an armored shell isn't that good, so we need to cover more delicate parts. And so, yeah, we need some clothing along the way. Also, shelter is an eventual thing that we, although live in moderate climates to begin with, we're going to have some shelter. Then we're going to look at grouping. Then we're going to look at order. And, of course, we have to look at survival of the species along the way. Well, this is what they're talking about with Mungo Man. Mungo Man is interesting because they find his remains in Australia. Not one of the first places we start thinking about when we begin to search for mankind. And what it does is it points to a very particular version of man with Mungo Man, because there are quite a few different versions of mankind that are affected regionally. What's important about him is they talk about, listen, we found this burial site. Well, here is what I want you to think. If they're talking a burial site, and then they find this grave, and in this grave is this red ochre, and this red ochre, by the current okay, by the current natives of the area, so by the current beginning founders of the area. So I'm talking about their Aboriginal cultures. Ochre is considered a burial, a holy material, something that they use to sanctify the burial sites. And this Mungo man and Mungo woman later on is buried with particular items. And so I want you to think, if we're talking about, listen, they buried them with intent, they buried them with certain ideas. This tells you huge things about the people. Okay? It tells you, number one, they have enough food because they're not eating the people. Now, I know that's gross, but that's life. Okay, they're not eating the people, so they have enough food. And then you look and they bury them with items, and so there is some ritual, there's some religious culture, there's some belief. They bury them with items that are still usable, and so they have an abundance or a reasonable abundance of materials available. They also have someone that's in charge of burial, someone that's in charge of ritual. They have a certain amount of abundance along the way. And it seems like it's telling you an awful lot, and actually it is. And from there, I want you to start thinking about mankind in general, because this is one version of man, just one version, and there's several different versions of man because man evolves over hundreds of thousands of years. Again, you are not your parents were not your grandparents, but then even your great-grandparents were completely different than the version of man that came, several thousand years before them. And so what's going to happen is we evolve, and the text talks about the very beginning of mankind, and it talks about hominins or hominids, depending on which version you want to look at. Not a homonym, because that's a word, but a hominid. And what it is, it's the beginning version of mankind. It's a proto-species. No, it's not a chimpanzee. It's not a gorilla. We are not related. That's not the way it works. But it is a version of being that is going to be successful. And as it tends to change, as it tends to mutate, as it tends to find certain strains that help it to evolve, to help it to change, to help it to survive under harsh conditions, well, what will happen is the root form of this being is in Africa. Okay, we can trace back our evolutionary beginnings. Females of our species carry something called mitochondrial DNA. Everyone has DNA. They carry a mitochondrial version of DNA as well, which it contains more genetic information. And we can trace back our mitochondrial DNA to a Mitochondrial Eve. No, not the one from the video game, because that's a darn scary video game, but Mitochondrial Eve, who is the surviving being of this species that we are from the root of at this particular point, and we can trace her back to Africa. And so what we have is we have a shared genetic heritage to this Mitochondrial Eve, but we can also trace the evolution of our species. So, yeah, we borrow a page from Darwin at this point and talk about the descent of man. We borrow a page and talk about how man or beings or animals change over time. And it's the most successful version that develop adaptations that are beneficial, that continue to survive and then continue to thrive. And so I want to talk in this next clip about the evolution of mankind as we go. So I'm going to go ahead and cut you off here and pick up a new one.